I don't know if anyone will ever see this, or if I'm even actually typing these words out right now, but it feels real enough to me. My laptop keyboard looks blurry, almost pixelated. The screen itself has degraded into this low-resolution mesh that makes it painful to look at, but the worst part is looking away from the computer. The framed pictures on the hotel wall, the heavy blanket draped over the mattress, and even the dark curtains blocking out the window. They all look like flat, lifeless 2D textures. Everything looks and feels completely wrong. I don't know what's happening to my eyes, or how long this will last, but I need to fix this. I need to get back home to my family. I think my brain is working perfectly fine. I can form logical thoughts. I can move my hands, and I know exactly who I am. But my vision is stubbornly stuck in this blocky, low-poly world. It started 2 days ago. I traveled up to Louisville for work. I'm a respiratory therapist and a basic life support instructor. I was scheduled to teach an early Friday morning CPR class at a community college. Whenever I have to travel for these gigs, I prefer to leave the day before so I can beat the traffic, find a decent hotel, and unwind before a long day of instructing. I headed out that Thursday morning, enjoying a nice quiet drive. I checked into my hotel room around 2:30 p.m., set up my adult and infant mannequins, organized my masks, and made sure all my paperwork was ready for the morning. With everything prepped, I finally threw myself onto the king-size bed and cracked open my laptop. I put on Netflix for a little bit to kill some time, but eventually, habit took over, and I opened up a new tab to check my emails. There were a few unread emails, but one specific subject line completely stopped me in my tracks. Early beta test for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Remake. My heart did a strange, sudden flip. I first played Ocarina of Time back in 1999, when I was just a 6-year-old kid. I can still picture the exact afternoon that I got it. My parents and I were out running errands, and they made a random stop at a dusty local pawn shop. Sitting behind the glass case was that gray Nintendo 64 cartridge. I remember pressing my face against the glass, practically begging and pleading with my parents until they finally agreed to buy it for me. On the entire drive home, I didn't take my eyes off that cartridge. The second we walked through the front door, I rushed to the TV and shoved it into the console. Even at 6, I was already obsessed with Zelda. My older brother had helped me beat A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo when I was only 4. So seeing the world of Hyrule suddenly transformed into full expansive 3D completely blew my young mind. It didn't feel like a video game. It felt like a real place. I played it like crazy, memorizing every hidden heart piece, every Scorchilla location, and every single musical note on the ocarina. Over the next few years, I beat it cover to cover more times than I could count. It was definitely one of the anchors of my childhood. When Nintendo officially revealed the gorgeous, ground-up remake, like many others, I was overwhelmed with that raw, heavy nostalgia. Seeing that realistic, modern footage of young Link woke up a part of my brain that had been asleep for years. Staring at my laptop screen in that quiet hotel room, my thumb was practically shaking over the trackpad of the laptop. I didn't stop to think about phishing scams or malware. The sheer excitement overrode my brain entirely. I clicked the email open. It read, "Dear valued Nintendo community member, congratulations. Based on your historical Nintendo account activity, verified software completion data, and your long-standing engagement with legacy titles, you have been selected to participate in a highly exclusive, closed alpha playtest for our upcoming title, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Remake. As we prepare to transition our testing environments to the upcoming next-generation hardware architecture, our development culture division is currently gathering telemetry data on cognitive feedback and emotional resonance from long-term players of their original 1998 release. Your demographic profile matches our exact requirements for this study. Because our target hardware environment is not yet publicly deployed, this test will not run natively on your current Nintendo Switch console. Instead, you are being granted temporary access to our experimental, secure web stream matrix. This environment allows our servers to render the high-fidelity assets in real time and stream them directly into a standard desktop web browser. Testing instructions and parameters. 1. Click the secure access link below to launch the web client portal. 2. Ensure you are in a quiet, dark environment with minimal external distractions to maximize immersion data accuracy. 3. Use a USB or Bluetooth controller for optimal input mapping. 4. Please note that by launching the application, you agree to a strict, legally binding, non-disclosure agreement. Recording, streaming, or capturing footage of this build is strictly prohibited and will result in the immediate termination of your access. Thank you for helping us shape the future of Hyrule. Sincerely, the Nintendo RD4 Network Architecture Team. Normally, my skeptic instincts would have kicked in. I would have flagged an email like that as a phishing scam or a malware trap within 2 seconds. But this felt different. It bypasses your usual defenses when something hooks directly into your oldest, happiest memories. I remember thinking it was an incredibly bizarre way for a massive corporate giant like Nintendo to distribute a beta test, but a desperate part of me just wanted it to be real. I clicked on the sender info, double-checking the domain. It looked flawless. Beneath the text was a link to the website. Taking a breath, I clicked the link. The browser opened up a stark, pitch-black page. After a few seconds, plain, white, unmoving text appeared in the dead center of the screen. Loading. It wasn't a sleek animation. It just sat there, flat and generic. Doubt instantly began to wash over me. But after a solid minute of staring at that empty text, the screen flickered. The iconic, multicolored Nintendo 64 logo appeared, slowly rotating in the darkness. It was the exact logo from 1998. But the geometry was incredibly crisp, the plastic surfaces reflecting a subtle, realistic light. My eyes lit up. My breath caught in my throat as the logo faded, my chest tightening in pure anticipation of what I knew was coming next. And then it happened. The heavy, rhythmic thud of Epana's hooves galloped through my laptop speakers. The screen bloomed into light, revealing a panoramic, jaw-dropping view of Hyrule Field beneath a massive, luminous full moon. When the iconic piano melody faded in, a physical wave of emotion hit me like a truck. Link was there, riding Epona across the landscape, just like the original intro, but the graphics were staggering. Calling it a video game doesn't do it justice. It looked like a multi-million-dollar movie. No, it looked like real life. I could see individual blades of grass parting from Epona's hooves, the realistic texture of Link's leather straps, and the way the moonlight realistically glinted off the Hylian's shield. The music was the exact arrangement from my childhood, but it sounded like a massive live orchestra was breathing right inside the hotel room. I wasn't wearing headphones, but those cheap, teeny laptop speakers somehow produced a sound that completely enveloped me, mimicking a high-end surround sound system. When the high, piercing notes of the ocarina soared over the piano strings, it went straight through me. A violent, intense shiver raced down my spine. I just sat there on the edge of the mattress, completely paralyzed with awe. A massive involuntary smile stretched across my face as hot tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't move a muscle. I watched Link ride all across the stunning, realistic expanse of Hyrule Field until the song began its slow, familiar fade, and the camera tracked down into the large, hollow tree trunk leading toward the Lost Woods. I braced myself, expecting the camera to cut to the classic shot of the Spirit Temple, as it does in the original loop. Instead, the screen cut to pitch black. The orchestral music died instantly. The sudden silence in the hotel room felt heavy, almost suffocating. Then, a tiny point of light flickered in the center of the dark screen. A swaying lantern, deep in the distance. I stared at it, completely transfixed, as it slowly grew larger, moving closer and closer. The rhythmic, hypnotic swaying of that single flame seemed to lock my eyes to the screen. As it neared the camera, the shadows pulled back to reveal the figure holding it. It was Dampé, the Gravekeeper. But it wasn't the goofy, cartoonish Gravekeeper from the N64. This was a hyper-realistic, ghastly apparition. His skin was a translucent, sickly blue-gray. His eyes hollowed out, and his tattered rags drifted around him as if he were submerged underwater. He wasn't looking at the camera. His vacant, dead stare was pointed slightly upward, looking beyond the screen, right past my shoulder, into the dark hotel room behind me. A knot of pure dread formed in my stomach. I expected the animation to stop, but Dampé just kept floating forward until he passed right out of the camera's frame. The screen returned to the total darkness, and through the speakers, I heard the quiet, trembling sound of Link shivering in the cold. The screen abruptly jumped to the File Select menu. The File Select menu was beautifully familiar, yet stripped down. There were no individual save slots like the original game. There were only two options rendered in a sharp modern font: New Game and Load. The background was that classic deep watery blue, and the iconic fairy theme began to play. The audio here wasn't upscaled by an orchestra. It was the exact, unaltered, beautifully nostalgic 1998 MIDI file. Hearing those synthesized notes instantly washed away the dread from Dampé, replacing it with that desperate, addictive childhood comfort. I leaned forward and mashed the spacebar, then the enter key, then the directional arrows. Nothing happened. The keyboard inputs were completely dead. The game seemed to be running perfectly fine. The fairy music continued to loop, but I couldn't press start. Adrenaline spiked through me. I couldn't just close the browser now. I had to play this. I scrambled off the bed, practically knocking my laptop over. I snatched my phone off the nightstand, grabbed my hotel key card, scooped my car keys off the desk, and bolted out the door. I ran down the carpeted hallway, bypassed the elevator for the stairs, and burst out into the cool night air. I threw myself into my car, backed out of the hotel parking space, and sped toward the nearest Walmart with one singular obsessive thought burning in my brain. I need to find a USB controller. The drive to Walmart was a blur of neon headlights and a roaring chest full of adrenaline. The lights of the city felt distant, like a background asset that hadn't fully loaded yet. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, but my mind wasn't on the road. It was trapped in 1999. Hearing that music, even just those few notes, had cracked open a vault in my head that I had kept sealed shut for decades. A swarm of memories hit me all at once, so thick it was almost suffocating. I started remembering the smell of the oat carpet in my childhood living room. I remembered the exact plastic clack of the N64 controller's analog stick, and the way the heavy glass TV screen would crackle with static when you turned it on. Life was just so incredibly good back then. It was simple. As I drove past the locked-up strip malls, I realized why that music had made me cry. It took me back to a time before the world got heavy, before the bills, before the stress of working in healthcare, and before the real dark traumas of my later life had found me. For a few minutes in that hotel room, the music had made me feel completely protected. It was like a shield. I pulled into the Walmart parking lot and hopped out of my car. I rushed toward the entrance. Stepping through those automatic sliding doors felt like walking onto another planet. The store was dead silent except for the distant sound of whatever pop song was playing over the store speakers. The contrast was jarring. I had this universe-shattering, hyper-realistic piece of history sitting on my laptop down the road, and here I was, walking through Walmart. I marched straight to the electronics section in the back. The lone employee working the counter looked exhausted, barely glancing up from his phone as I approached the locked glass cabinets. My eyes scanned the rows of plastic-wrapped hardware until they landed on it, a wired USB controller designed for the Nintendo Switch. I walked over to the employee. "Can I get that controller right there?" I asked, my voice sounding a little too fast, a little too intense for a casual late-night purchase. The employee nodded slowly. He walked over and unlocked the case with a heavy ring of keys and handed the controller to me. I paid the employee at the electronics desk. The drive back to the hotel was even faster. The controller sat on the passenger seat. The nostalgic warmth from earlier was starting to curdle into a strange, nervous energy. The seeds of doubt were creeping back in. Why did Dampé look like that? By the time I pulled back into the hotel parking lot, my heart was hammering against my ribs again. I ran up the stairs, swiped my key card, and burst back into the room. The laptop was exactly where I left it on the king-size bed. The screen was still glowing, casting a deep, watery blue light across the white pillows. And through the small speakers, the loops of the Great Fairy theme were still playing, unchanged, pristine, and waiting for me to press start. I ripped the plastic packaging open. I pulled out the matte black controller and jammed the USB cable into the port on my laptop. A notification popped up in the bottom right corner of the screen. Installing device drivers. It felt like the longest 5 seconds of my life. The moment the notification cleared, I gripped the handles and mashed the start button. The classic chime echoed through the room, and the blue select menu dissolved into black. The next thing I saw was brief white text on top of the solid black screen. It read, "A thing that does not change with time is a memory of younger days." After about 3 seconds of this text, the opening cutscene began. The opening cutscene played out frame for frame like the 1998 original. Young Link stood in the pouring rain outside the drawbridge of Hyrule Market. The drawbridge dropped, and a horse burst through the storm, carrying Zelda and Impa into the night, followed closely by Ganondorf, roaring past on his massive black steed. But seeing it in this hyper-realistic engine changed everything. The heavy sheets of rain catching the flickering torchlight, the raw terror in child Zelda's eyes. It felt terrifyingly visceral. When all the cutscenes ended, the camera panned down to the canopy of Kokiri Forest, right into Link's treehouse. The second Navi woke him up, and the camera snapped behind his green cap. I was in total control. I began exploring a version of the forest that felt impossibly alive. I ran through the grass, kicking up tiny digital fireflies. I knew the layout like the back of my hand. I hunted down the exact chests and tall grass to collect the 40 rupees I knew I'd need for the Deku shield. I crawled through the narrow dirt tunnel, dodging the giant rolling boulders to claim the Kokiri sword. I was loving every single second of it. The lingering dread from being alone in the hotel room, my upcoming BLS class, and all my adult anxieties, they all evaporated. I was completely, hopelessly immersed. What blew my mind was that even though the graphics were cutting edge and lifelike, in my head, it felt exactly like it did when I was 6 years old. This incredible level of detail and atmosphere was exactly how my childhood imagination had filled in the blanks of those old blocky N64 pixels back in the day. Everything was going perfectly. I made it through the Great Deku Tree, navigating the spider webs, and smoothly defeated Queen Galma in the basement. But then the game gave me the Kokiri Emerald, and the Great Deku Tree began to die. In the original game, his bark just fades to gray. Here, it was the most horrific thing I have ever witnessed. Watching Ganondorf's curse take his life felt like watching a real ancient forest get consumed by a silent, agonizing fire. The massive, beautiful wooden face began to cave in. The thick, vibrant bark rotted away into a chalky, ash-gray texture right before my eyes. His massive leafy limbs sagged and snapped under their own weight, and the vibrant, glowing green ecosystem around his roots withered into a dead, charred black. I felt a deep, sickening connection to this digital entity losing its life. As his final words faded from the screen, I literally felt a physical wave of energy draining right out of my own body. My limbs felt heavy. I couldn't look away. I couldn't even blink. Tears burned the edges of my eyes. The camera cut to a sharp close-up of young Link standing before the massive, rotting monument of the Deku Tree. Link was standing there with his head bowed low, his small shoulders slumped forward. I felt so connected with Link at that moment. A wave of hopelessness flooded me. I wanted to get away from the dead Great Deku Tree as fast as humanly possible. The charred, peeling bark and the blackened ground were just too horrific to look at any longer. I jammed the analog stick forward, but Link didn't react. I mashed the buttons, but nothing happened. It was as if the game was physically forcing my eyes to stay glued to the screen, demanding that I fully absorb the death and destruction of the scene. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 30 seconds, Link finally responded to the controller. I turned him around and ran out of the clearing without looking back. In the original game, an NPC named Mido blocks your path and blames Link for the Deku Tree's death. He was waiting for me in this remake too. When I pressed the button to talk to him, the text that printed across the screen looked normal at first. It read, "The Great Deku Tree. Did he die?" I pressed A to advance the text, expecting him to say his next classic line, "It's all your fault." But that's not what he said. The words that printed across the text box sent a shiver down my spine. "How could you let her die?" The words stared back at me from the text box. Instant goosebumps erupted across my arms. My mind violently fractured, plunging me into a flashback of an incident from a few years ago. I was working a slow, quiet night in the ER. Out of nowhere, the automatic doors burst open. A young mother came rushing in, screaming, cradling the limp, unresponsive body of her 9-year-old daughter. The code team scrambled instantly. The little girl wasn't breathing. She didn't have a pulse. As the respiratory therapist on duty, the airway was my absolute responsibility. The ER doctor was nowhere to be found, so the nurses and I had to run the code alone. I grabbed the bag valve mask, sealing it over her small face and manually bagging her, trying to force oxygen into her lungs, while a nurse started chest compressions. Another nurse desperately searched for a line to start epinephrine. Through it all, the mother stood in the corner, wailing, panicking, watching her child fade away. I was having a brutal time trying to ventilate the patient manually. Feeling the pressure mounting in my chest, I reached for the emergency intubation kit. My hands were steady despite the chaos, and I successfully passed the tube into the child's trachea, securing the airway. We tried everything. We pushed meds. We compressed. We bagged until our arms burned. We did absolutely everything by the protocol, but she just wasn't coming back. When the code was finally called, the mother's grief tore through the room. She screamed through her tears, a sound that still echoes in my nightmares. How could you let her die? Even though we followed every single procedure perfectly, the guilt of that night has haunted me for years. I felt like I had personally failed that little girl and failed her mother. But this game couldn't possibly know anything about that. There's absolutely no way. But why did the text box say her? The Great Deku Tree is fundamentally known as a he. It made absolutely no sense. I forced myself to shake off the uneasy feeling. I gripped the controller and pressed the button to continue. It suddenly showed Link holding a heart container above his head. I now had 5 hearts. It didn't make any sense for me to get a full heart container here, but I figured it was just an unintended item glitch. Mido stepped out of my way, and as I approached the exit tunnel that led out of the village, the screen transitioned into the iconic bridge cutscene. This was supposed to be the moment where Saria catches up to Link, offering him the fairy ocarina as a token of their eternal friendship before he leaves his childhood behind forever. It's always been one of the most heartwarming scenes in gaming history. But standing there on that realistic wooden footbridge, suspended over the dark, yawning ravine, and surrounded by lost woods, an unexplainable fear took hold of me. All I could hear was the terrifying, hyper-realistic noise of the lost woods surrounding me. I could hear the aggressive rustling of the heavy leaves, the sharp snapping of thick branches in the deep shadows, and the sounds of the owls. It was maddening. I couldn't even focus on Saria's dialogue boxes because the sheer chaotic weight of the audio was actively tormenting me. My heart raced as the surround sound pressure of the woods squeezed against my ears. The scene carried on, the graphics rendering the deep sadness in Saria's eyes as she handed Link the ocarina. After that, Saria did not stay standing on the bridge to watch Link walk away. Instead, her hyper-realistic model took a step backward. Her face remained entirely blank, devoid of any expression, as she silently tilted herself over the rope railing and fell backward, straight down into the pitch-black abyss of the lost woods below. The loud sounds of the lost woods came to a halt, and I was left with complete silence from the laptop speakers. The sudden departure from reality hit me like a splash of ice water. It snapped me completely out of the trance the game had locked me into. I practically dropped the controller onto my lap and tore my eyes away from the screen, staring wildly around the pitch-black hotel room. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and I suddenly got the feeling that I wasn't alone. It felt like something or someone was watching me. This game was really starting to give me the creeps. I continued on, stepping out into Hyrule Field. It looked exactly like the map I knew by heart, except it was absolutely massive. The sheer scale of the landscape was incredible. The grass rolling over the hills looked so hyper-realistic and vast that it instantly made me feel tiny sitting there on the edge of my hotel bed. But looking at that beautiful, open horizon actually began to put me at ease. I figured I was just overreacting. Maybe there was nothing to be afraid of. I rationalized that Nintendo had probably intentionally added those dark, unsettling vibes since the creepy atmosphere had been so popular and iconic in Majora's Mask. Out here, under the bright blue sky, nothing felt hostile. It felt like an open world of endless possibilities, and I was free to take whatever path I wanted. I spent a long time just walking Link around, soaking it all in. I was genuinely enjoying myself for several minutes before the sky began to shift. Because the field was so enormous, I had barely covered any ground before the sun fully dipped below the horizon. The iconic, distant wolf howl echoed all around me, signaling that night had fallen. I instinctively drew my sword, waiting for the Style Children to start barreling up from the dirt. After a few seconds, the ground cracked open, and they emerged. They looked absolutely horrific. They looked like real-life remains, with jagged shards of yellowed bone and bits of rotted flesh still clinging to their ribs. A thought suddenly flashed through my head. Maybe this game never needed a hyper-realistic remake. Upscaling a game like this takes all the subtle, creepy parts of the original and pushes them to an almost unbearable extreme. I started swinging the sword to fight them off, but the raw level of detail had me genuinely fearing for Link's life. I didn't want him to get touched by those things. Their childish, skeletal laughter and the wet, grinding crunch of their joints moving toward me chilled me to the core. My heart was pounding, until one distinct sound caused it to stop completely. It was the sound of two voices, violently yelling at one another. I froze, staring at the screen in complete disbelief. The audio was coming directly from the Style Children as they lunged at me. It sounded exactly like the voices of my parents. In my panic, I didn't even think to just slam the laptop lid shut. My only instinct was a desperate, intense need to get Link far away from them. I turned him around and ran. I couldn't see the skeletons behind me as I fled, but I knew they were right there, just outside the camera's frame, chasing me through the dark. And as they chased me, the voices grew louder. I could hear the exact arguing, the screaming, the cursing, and the bitter accusations. I recognized the specific argument instantly. It was a core memory from my childhood, the very first time my parents had openly fought while I was in the room. It had completely broken something inside me as a kid, and hearing it played back to me through my laptop speakers was breaking me all over again. The way their hateful words echoed through the room made me feel like I was on the verge of a total mental breakdown. I hit the pause button, desperate to clear the audio, but the pause menu didn't save me. Even with the game frozen, the shouting continued. Unpausing, I kept moving Link blindly through the dark, and that's when I saw the faint, flickering torches of Lon Lon Ranch far in the distance. Fighting through the choking wave of pain and sadness, I focused every ounce of my energy on getting Link to those gates. I finally slammed against the heavy gates of Lon Lon Ranch. They were locked tight. No matter what buttons I mashed on the controller, the gates wouldn't budge, and there was no loading screen to save me. The Style Children closed in fast, completely cornering me against the gates. The distorted screaming voices of my parents echoed out from their rattling ribs, louder and more chaotic than ever before. It was hopeless. I had nowhere left to run. I just braced myself and waited for the game over screen. The skeletons lunged, clawing and smacking at Link. With every hit he took, a sudden pressure spiked in my own head. It wasn't a physical bruise, but a neurological assault. A phantom pain that locked my muscles. My eyes were glued to the screen. I couldn't blink, and I couldn't turn away. Then, the ground beneath Hyrule Field violently shuddered. Several long, skinny, pale hands erupted from the dirt. They whipped through the air, blindly smacking and crushing the Style Children, demolishing them into splinters. Right in front of Link, a massive pit opened in the soil, and the grotesque, bloated body of Dead Hand rose into the moonlight. With his impossibly long neck and a head pointing straight up at the sky, the monster was a thing of absolute nightmares. Yet, he used his pale, slimy, sickening body to form a physical wall, shielding Link from the remaining swarms, while his several hands finished tearing the skeletons to pieces. Within seconds, the field went quiet. The Style Children were nothing but crumbles of bone in the grass. The pale hands burrowed back into the dirt, leaving only the main creature standing. I sat on the edge of the mattress, trembling. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A strange, unexplainable wave of gentleness was radiating from an enemy that had scared the absolute shit out of me as a child. Dead Hand just stood there, staring at Link. His hyper-realistic, undead eyes peered straight through Link, locking onto mine through the laptop. I stared back, paralyzed by a bizarre mix of horror and an intense, heavy feeling of sorrow for this creature. The horizon began to glow, and Dead Hand instantly plunged backward, burrowing out of sight into the earth. I was on a total roller coaster of emotions, but confusion and fear weighed the heaviest. Looking at the screen, a desperate realization hit me. Hyrule Field was too dangerous for a child. Link was too small, too weak to survive out here. If that monster hadn't randomly intervened, Link would be dead. Without thinking, I turned away from the wrench and ran Link straight toward the drawbridge of the market town. I wanted the Master Sword. I needed it now. I needed to grow up so I could properly defend myself against this world. When I finally reached Market Town, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The bustling, lively streets from my childhood memories were entirely dead. There were no townspeople, no dogs running around, and no cheerful market music. It was eerily quiet. I ran straight to the Temple of Time and pushed through the heavy doors. Looking down the long marble nave, I saw that the massive door of time was already wide open. In my desperation, my mind didn't even care that I hadn't collected the other 2 spiritual stones. I didn't care about the rules. I just needed to be older, stronger, and safe. I ran Link up the altar steps, gripped the hilt of the Master Sword, and pulled it from the pedestal. Instantly, the laptop screen flashed a blinding solid white. The actual lights in the hotel room erupted into an intense, searing glare. I couldn't see anything. A loud, high-pitched ringing pierced my ears, drowning out the world. I felt a violent, sickening sensation in my chest, like my physical body was being jerked through space and time. When the sensation finally stopped, I opened my eyes. My vision was blurry and unfocused. I took a shaky breath and looked around the hotel room. The cheap wooden desk, the curtains, the edge of the nightstand, everything looked blocky, flat and pixelated. The real world was losing its detail. I forced my eyes back to the laptop screen. Link was standing in the Chamber of Sages. It looked fractured, covered in deep digital cracks, and Link's adult model flickered with a subtle, unstable glitch. Standing directly in front of him was Sheik. A single dialogue box was already printed on the screen, waiting for me. The flow of time is always cruel. Its speed seems different for each person, but no one can change it. I slowly stood up from the low poly mattress and walked over to the wall of the hotel room. I had to know if I was hallucinating. I extended a trembling hand and pressed my palm against the surface. The drywall felt stiff, but when I reached for the curtains hanging over the window, my fingers stopped dead. They were completely flat. There was no third dimension to them, no fabric folds, no texture. They were just a 2D image printed onto the wall. I held both of my hands up to my face in the dim glow of the laptop. My skin looked dry, losing its elasticity, and faint, deep wrinkles lined the backs of my knuckles. They looked older, much older. I spun around to look in the bathroom mirror, but there was no reflection waiting for me. The glass was gone, replaced by a flat, muddy gray 2D texture. I stumbled backward and sat back down on the edge of the bed, utterly defeated. I felt like I had completely lost my mind. I glanced back at the laptop screen. Link was now standing in the Temple of Time, positioned right next to the empty Master Sword pedestal. Sheik was nowhere in sight. Link's model was turned completely around, staring directly out of the monitor. When I looked him in the eyes, I felt an intense, undeniable connection to the model on the screen. It was the exact same feeling of exhaustion and survival I felt inside my own body. I reached down and gripped the controller with my aged hands. I could feel it in my very soul. The only way out of this altered reality was to keep playing. I didn't know how I was going to escape, or if I would even survive the night, but I knew this nightmare had started with the game. It had to end with the game. I pushed the analog stick forward and guided adult Link out into the ruins of Hyrule. I stepped out of the Temple of Time and into the ruins of Market Town. Scattered across the cobblestones were the hunched, clay-like bodies of several re-deads. I held my breath, gently pushing the analog stick to try and sneak past them. And then a loud, blood-curdling scream pierced the air. My muscles instantly locked. My eyes froze, forced wide open. My fingers clamped tightly around the handles of the controller. It felt exactly like a sudden attack of sleep paralysis. On screen, a Redead stood up, its empty eye sockets fixing onto Link as it began its slow, jerking walk toward him. I tried with everything I had to move my thumb, to force the analog stick forward, but my body refused to respond. To make it worse, a foul, heavy stench of stagnant rot suddenly flooded my actual hotel room, so thick I could practically taste it on the back of my tongue. The monster was right on top of Link when the paralysis abruptly broke. I slammed my thumb against the stick, barely rolling out of the way, but the moment I stood up, a second scream shattered the silence. I was locked in place once again. Another Redead, one I hadn't seen hiding in the shadows, lunged forward. It leaped onto Link's back, wrapping its long arms around his neck, choking the life out of his model. Link's health depleted rapidly. 3 hearts. 2. 1. I couldn't break the freeze. Link's final heart vanished, and his body fell over, crashing into the cobblestones. But a traditional game over screen never came. Instead, a frantic, fast-paced electronic pulse began to beat through the laptop speakers. The entire screen started to blur and warp, sloshing around like liquid. I stared at it, sweating and shaking, my mind racing. I began mashing random buttons in a panic. When I hit the A button, Link's chest briefly rose and fell. I pressed it again. His chest moved again. It seemed like the game was simulating chest compressions. The survival instinct from my years in medicine took over, overriding the sheer absurdity of the situation. I stopped mashing and forced my thumb into a strict, rhythmic pattern, hitting the A button at exactly 120 beats per minute. The line between reality and the software dissolved completely. It felt like I was physically down on the cobblestones with him, fighting to keep a real human being from slipping away. The screen kept fading toward black, the music growing louder and faster with every second. I ignored it, locking my eyes on the rhythm. After what felt like an entire minute of continuous compressions, Link's eyes snapped open. He slowly pushed himself up from the ground, his health flashing with a single, fragile heart. The screen snapped back to normal, and I frantically guided Link away from the town square, bursting into the open air of Hyrule Field. I dropped the controller onto the pixelated mattress. I leaned over, resting my elbows on my knees, taking deep breaths. My arms were trembling. My shirt was soaked in sweat. I felt completely exhausted. The piercing, rhythmic beep of Link's low health warning echoed off the flat 2D walls of the hotel room with every single chime. My actual heart thudded hard in my chest, locking into perfect, terrifying synchronization with the game. I felt incredibly fragile, as if I was barely clinging to life. If Link took one more hit, I knew with absolute certainty that my own heart would simply stop. I frantically began slashing at the grass and tossing rocks aside, desperately praying for a heart to drop. But the game refused to give me a break. All I found was the occasional green rupee. Then, I cut through a thick patch of weeds near the castle walls, and something bizarre popped out. It was a plastic cassette player. When I guided Link over it, he didn't hold it triumphantly above his head. The object just vanished from the ground. I opened the inventory menu, but the item slots were empty. There was no trace of it. The relentless beeping was suffocating me, pushing me to the absolute verge of a panic attack. And then beneath the digital alarm, a low layer of static began to hiss through the laptop speakers. A song was playing. The audio was heavily distorted, but the melody was unmistakable. It was Mbop by Hanson, but it wasn't the clean studio version of the track. It sounded exactly like how a song plays when you try to recreate it entirely from memory in your own head. The recognizable chorus was mostly there, but the verses, the parts my brain couldn't quite recall after decades, were rendered as an eerie, garbled slurry of digital gibberish. I hadn't heard that song in years. Back in the late 90s, my older brother used to blast that track on an endless loop in our bedroom, desperately trying to drown out the sound of my parents screaming at each other downstairs. That was the exact moment the puzzle pieces finally clicked together. This game wasn't just a glitchy beta, it was a targeted psychological trap. It was utilizing something like an incredibly advanced, invasive software, something akin to a deeply hostile AI that was actively mapping the neural pathways of my brain, siphoning out my deepest childhood memories and using them to dismantle my sanity. That's what I thought, at least. I knew the song was coming from the cassette player I had picked up. When I turned toward Kokiri Forest, the volume swelled. The memory of the song was physically guiding me. I pushed the analog stick toward the Kokiri Forest, my chest aching as my heart continued its maddening, synced rhythm with the low health alarm. By the time I crossed the threshold into the village, the distorted Hanson track was blaring loudly from the laptop. The forest was pitch black. The vibrant colors from earlier were entirely gone, and the village was totally devoid of NPCs. The music pulled me straight toward the gaping hollow log that led to the lost woods. I stopped right at the entrance, paralyzed by a primitive, overwhelming sense of dread. Every protective instinct in my body told me to shut the laptop, but the neurological hold the game had on me was too strong. And all of a sudden, the sound of a witch laughing made me jump. The sudden noise scared the living hell out of me. The low health alarm and my physical pulse spiked, beeping and hammering 10 times faster against my ribs. From the dark shadows of the tunnel, the twin witches from the spirit temple sailed out into the open on their broomsticks. My mind instantly flashed back to Majora's Mask, to the specific quest where one of the old hags is found collapsed and injured deep in the woods, and you have to bring her a red potion to save her life. The witches swooped over Link's head and vanished into the night sky. The seemingly random events in this game were no longer a surprise to me. I understood the cruel logic of the game now. The game had used those witches as a bridge to trigger an entirely different, deeply buried memory. It knew that thinking of a hurt, helpless creature lost in the woods would drag my mind back to Badger. Badger was my childhood dog who had gone missing years ago. My dad, my brother, and I went out one cold, damp morning, trekking through the thick woods behind our house, shouting his name until our throats were raw. After a grueling hour, we finally found him lying in a pile of wet leaves, barely clinging to life. We had scooped up his shivering body, desperately running back toward the truck to rush him to the vet. But Badger never made it out of those woods. He died in my brother's arms. I sat there in the dim, blocky hotel room, a tear leaking down my cheek. I just couldn't understand the malicious intent behind this experiment. At the start of the night, the game had given me so much warmth. It had baited me in with my favorite childhood safe haven, only to systematically weaponize my worst real-world traumas to make me suffer. I felt like I needed to follow the music and enter the lost woods. With my chest burning and the music screaming from the speakers, I stepped through the hollow log and entered the lost woods. The structure of the Lost Woods was identical to the 1998 game, with 4 gaping tunnels branching off into darkness. The distorted, garbled audio of mbop swelled and faded from the laptop speakers, guiding me through the correct pathways. But as I pushed deeper into the fog, the trees began to look painfully familiar. It was the exact layout of the forest behind my childhood home. I took another turn, and right there in the center of the path sat a thick mound of damp, dead leaves. It was an exact replica of where we had found Badger. Resting on top of the pile was a heart container. I frantically guided Link over it, my health fully restored. The maddening, high-speed beeping instantly ceased. My actual heart rate slowed, dropping back into a normal rhythm. I collapsed backwards onto the pixelated hotel mattress. After a few moments, I sat back up and gripped the controller. Following the fading static of the cassette tape, I navigated the final tunnels and emerged into the sacred forest meadow. I braced myself, expecting the wolf from the original game to lunge at me from the grass. The clearing was empty, except for a lone, oversized frog sitting silently in the grass. I bypassed it and moved into the maze. I carefully angled the camera around the corners, watching out for the moblins, the towering, blocky guards with massive spears that charge at you on sight in the original game. When the first one finally pulled into view, it was a grotesque, hyper-realistic monster, its flesh looking like a mangled mix of a bulldog and a wild boar. I tried to carefully time my movements to sneak past it, But the moment I stepped into its line of sight, a flood of memories from my early 20s violently hit my brain. It was the exact crushing weight of my worst early adult years, the endless, desperate search for a job, only for something to go horribly wrong every time I finally got hired, the failed attempt at starting a band that went absolutely nowhere, the humiliating rejections from girls I genuinely cared about as I tried to force Link around the corner. A specific, agonizing memory of a girl publicly laughing at my feelings slammed into me. At that exact split second, the monster spotted Link. It roared, charging forward and violently thrusting its spear into Link's chest. The impact didn't just hurt the character, it felt like a physical manifestation of that old humiliation, violently shoving me backward out of the corridor. Link stood up, and I tried again, my hands trembling as I tried to pass the next guard. Instantly, the memory of the afternoon my best friend got accepted into the program we both applied for, while I opened a rejection letter, flashed in my mind. The Moblin guard charged, knocking me back into a small pool of water. My mind was entirely paralyzed by the failures of my past. The maze wasn't just a level anymore. It was a physical trap made of my own inadequacies. Every corner I turned felt like another door slamming in my face, and those grotesque creatures were the literal roadblocks that had kept me stagnant for years. I felt entirely powerless against them. But as Link floated in the water, something shifted inside me. I thought about my family. I thought about all the months I spent building discipline, completely reshaping my mindset from scratch. I remember the exact day I finally got accepted into respiratory school, and the overwhelming pride of walking across that stage at graduation. Through every single failure, every rejection, and every door slammed in my face, I had fought my way to a good life. Those old ghosts didn't own me anymore. With that thought anchoring my mind, the paralyzing fog cleared. I gripped the controller with a sudden, calm focus. I climbed out of the water. Bravely, I navigated the tight corridors, perfectly baiting the creatures and slipping past their spears before they could touch me. The final moblin that stands there with the giant club just stood there and allowed me to pass. I walked past him, ran up the stone steps, and stood directly under the dark, vine-covered entrance of the forest temple. The Hansen track suddenly cut out. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and dead. The cassette player had guided me straight to the forest temple entrance, but I couldn't understand why. I didn't have the hookshot item yet, meaning it was physically impossible to enter the temple. Sheik didn't appear to give me a cutscene like in the original game. I ran Link around the courtyard, searching for clues. But the game had lost all audio. Link's footsteps made no sound. After a few minutes of empty searching, I turned to walk back down the steps toward the meadow maze. When I looked down, at the bottom of the stairs, it didn't lead back to the maze. It opened directly into a vast, empty void. It looked like outer space, but completely hollow. No stars, no light, just an infinite black abyss. I whipped Link around to run back up, but the forest temple area was actively disintegrating. The geometry was failing to load. Jagged pieces of the stone walls and patches of grass flickered in place, surrounded by the creeping black void. Desperate, I tried to force Link through a glitched seam in the wall, hoping to force the game to load the temple. Instead, Link slipped straight through the broken textures. He let out a yell as his model plummeted into the out-of-bounds darkness. The screen cut to black. When the pixels reformed, Link was standing on the bridge of Lake Hylia. The water level wasn't drained like it usually is in the adult era. It was excessively, unnaturally high, almost touching the bridge. Looking out across the dark water, I noticed a strange shape bobbing near the small island above the water temple. It looked like two pale legs sticking straight up out of the lake. Without thinking, I made Link dive over the railing. I swam him out through the heavy water toward the shape. The game didn't give me an action prop to grab it, but when Link's model collided with the object, it reacted to the physics engine. For several tedious minutes, I used Link's body to slowly push the floating mass through the water, dragging it out onto the dry grass of the island. It was the happy mask salesman. His face was locked in his iconic, wide, unblinking grin, staring blankly up at the sky. I stared at the screen, my mind frantically trying to figure out why the game was displaying this. And that's when the memory hit me. It was my best friend from high school. He was the funniest, most light-hearted person you could ever meet. The kind of guy who could pull you out of any dark mood with a single goofy face. One summer night, he went out fishing on the lake with some friends. Everyone had been drinking. He wasn't wearing a life jacket, and he slipped overboard. They tried to save him, but he quickly became lost in the dark waters of the lake. I was completely devastated when I got the call the next morning. For years, I couldn't help but picture his body floating somewhere out in that freezing, dirty lake. And because I had never seen him without a huge, goofy smile on his face, my brain could never picture him looking sad, even in death. That was why the masked salesman was floating in the water, grinning. Tears blurred my vision as the sheer cruelty of the game sunk in. I watched the screen as a full heart container appeared, hovering above the salesman's body. The pattern was entirely clear now. The game was acting as a psychological mirror. Every time it successfully mined an agonizing memory of someone I loved passing away, it rewarded me with a piece of health. It was a twisted incentive program, trying to keep me playing by trading my real-world grief for digital survival. I wasn't going to pick up the heart. I wasn't going to give this game what it wanted. I turned Link around to walk back to the bridge. A low voice came from the speakers. "Do you not care about me?" I stopped in my tracks. I slowly turned Link back toward the island. The masked salesman was now looking at me. As I stood there staring at him, he once again repeated it, but much more aggressively. "Do you not care about me?" The screen violently shuddered as the masked salesman began to rise from the ground. It was warping, its limbs twisting, the skin stretching and snapping over his shifting bone structure as the salesman's model violently morphed into Dampe. It was a disgusting, corrupted sight. Dampe floated into the air, his skeletal hand gripping the swinging, glowing lantern as he drifted directly toward Link. I panicked, grabbing the controller and sprinting Link back to the bridge. Suddenly, I had a total change of heart. I stopped running. I turned Link around, drew the Master Sword, and resolved to fight for my life. Dampe hesitated, hovering a few feet away, swinging his lantern back and forth. With every rhythmic swing of the light, a heavy wave of dizziness hit my actual brain, trying to paralyze me again. I fought through it, pressing the button to make Link charge forward, slashing the blade directly into the glass of the lantern. A massive explosion shattered the audio. The screen flashed a solid red for several seconds before fading back to the lake. Dampe was still there, staring down at his shattered lantern. The sorrow on his face instantly shifted into pure, unadulterated rage. He slammed his fists into the ground. The game world completely broke. The terrain fissured, and out of the broken code rose a giant, towering beast. It wasn't Ganon. It wasn't anything from the original game. It was a shifting, chaotic mass of corrupted, broken textures and random green numbers flashing across a mangled body. It swung a massive fist at Link. I rode out of the way, but where its hand struck the ground, the grass permanently turned into a garbled mess of missing pixels. I lunged forward, slinging the Master Sword at its legs, but the moment the blade touched the monster, the sword itself glitched into a jagged line of code. I ran over to the bridge. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't hurt the beast. As the beast closed in on me, my mind suddenly flashed back to Saria jumping off the bridge. I turned Link and did a backflip off of the bridge into the water. When Link hit the water, the audio erupted into an unbearable, screeching static. The graphics dissolved into a wave of broken polygons. I couldn't see anything, but I kept desperately holding forward on the analog stick, blind, deaf, and feeling the flat 2D walls of the hotel room closing in around my body. The screen blacked out, and then reloaded. Link was standing in the ruins of Ganon's castle. It was Dampe waiting for me, his lantern fully restored. He closed the distance instantly, striking Link over and over. I tried to make Link stand up and swing, but the inputs were delayed. I was knocked down again and again until my health completely emptied down to a single flashing heart. The rapid, fatal beep returned. My eyes were blurry. This was the end. And then the ground of the ruins erupted. Dozens of pale, skinny hands burst from the ground, followed by the heavy, bloated body of Dead Hand. Like before, the creature threw itself directly in front of Link, acting as a massive, fleshy shield against Danpei's attacks. Danpei lashed out with the lantern, burning the pale skin of the monster. The hands didn't back down. They fought with a violent, desperate fury. One of the severed hands swiped upward, knocking the lantern from Danpei's grip, while 4 others slammed the Gravekeeper into the ground, pinning him flat. Dead Hand approached Danpei. He lowered his long, pale neck, opened his massive jaws, and with one swift, brutal motion, tore Danpei's model completely apart. The screen went quiet as Danpei's remaining textures glitched out and vanished. I stared at the monitor, tears streaming down my face. Dead Hand turned his long neck, his hyper-realistic, sorrowful eyes looking directly into the camera. The distorted, imperfect memory track of Mbop began to softly play through the speakers again. From the edges of the ruined arena, other figures slowly drifted into the light. A little girl, a dog, the smiling mask salesman. They walked over and just stood in a quiet, protective circle around Link. In that final, quiet moment, the truth broke through. Dead Hand hadn't saved me by coincidence. The game had systematically mapped my brain, trying to isolate my memory of my older brother, my ultimate childhood protector, and trying to suppress his memory by hiding it in the most horrific monster in the game, assuming I would run away from it in fear. But the game had completely failed. My brother's protective instinct was too strong for the code. His memory had found a way to manifest anyway, using the monster's terrifying strength to shield me from the despair. As Dead Hand slowly began to fade away into white pixels, a final, spinning heart container appeared where he had stood. The other phantoms gently waved at Link before dissolving into the air, leaving adult Link standing completely alone in the ruins of the castle. The screen faded to black, and the stark white text printed across the screen one last time. The flow of time is always cruel. Its speed seems different for each person, but no one can change it. A thing that does not change with time is a memory of younger days.